let's talk about the people that are doing a really phenomenal job, like the pollies who are getting a massive pay increase. Anthony Albanese's salary is going to surpass 600K, as other pollies also get a pay increase. Peter Dutton will actually end up also getting a pay increase up to 432,000. And we're also going to see a situation where I think one of the top MPs, one of the top public servants, says it's tipped over $1 million for them as well. What do you guys think? Well deserved?
That's a public servant. I still can't get over how much money public servants get. Was it the head of APRA, or I can't remember who was in Parliament, and they was it Gerard Rennick or Malcolm Roberts that asked them how much they're making, and he said something like 900 and something thousand. And I thought, you're a public servant, like literally.
Yeah.
I understand that a head of a huge organisation deserves to get paid, but that's ludicrous when the Prime Minister's getting paid $600,000. Not that he deserves that much anyway, but he's not doing a great job.
And important to note, I forgot to mention, this is their third pay increase since Albo came into office. I mean, have you guys received like a 3% pay increase in the time that you've been in your job? Increase on increase? I mean, this is a really, really bad look. They should be doing something like what Donald Trump did, where he donated his paycheck every quarter, to something going on, even a pay freeze or something. I mean, things are really tough out there.
Well, how do we justify giving ourselves... Oh, I think it's obscene, to be quite honest with you. I actually think it's ridiculous. I think it's... Well, I'm going to use a colloquial term here. It's un-Australian. Here we have families, and I know this because I get people calling me saying, look, people are wanting to foreclose, they're wanting to do, all sorts of things. I've got debt collectors knocking on my door. It's a real sad time, and I actually wrote to Anne Stanley, and I also wrote to the Minister for Finance talking about, what are we doing to relieve the pressure on the average Aussie? What are we doing for that? You look at Mission Australia, record numbers of people, mums feeding children out of the back of their car, and then we get these pay rises. Look, I do get a bit emotional about that, because here we have kids, we've got single mums literally opening the back of their station wagon, and that's their pantry. That's their pantry, and they sort of move the pantry to the side, and they put the seats down so they can sleep there for the night. We've got homeless people now. They're sitting on riverbanks, and they're looking for some sort of cover over their head. It's a pretty cold winter. It's and what we're seeing here, when we see that, I just can't help but feel for the people out on the streets, and I think we can all do a little bit more to hold the politicians to account. And I can't see where they don't have the spine to look after their own communities. And I hold the councils responsible somewhat too. Look, they're not individually responsible because they're not the ones doing this, because it's at a much higher level, but it's our policies. It's that wider policy of pushing manufacturing out, getting all that. It hasn't come down. It's not trickling down to the Aussie, but it happens to trickle down to them. How does it trickle down to them and not to the Aussie? And I think you made a good point. There's sacrifice, or if they all took a sacrifice instead of 600, go down to 300, start distributing that. Watch policy start improving, because you should not be rewarded for something you're not achieving.
It's shocking, Chris. I'm going to come to you in a sec, but one of the points I heard from the mainstream media, I think it was on the project, they were saying, look, this is decided by a panel of experts that are professors, and they're across different boards.
Where have we heard that before?
Oh, yeah. They trust the experts, guys, of course.
Yeah.
These experts have basically said, look, we don't want to end up in a situation where if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. What do you think about that, Chris?
I think they're right.
Right.
I think politicians should be paid more.
Right.
Take that as a clip. But close the revolving door to the private sector.
Right.
Much more strict limits
That makes
on
sense.
asset ownership and disclosure.
That actually makes sense.
All of these limits that you bring in, pay them $1 million a year. You've got 150 seats in federal parliament, move it to 150. That's $150 million a year that you stop from leaking to the private sector. And all of a sudden, you've got all of these CEOs and bankers that otherwise would just go and Matt Keane their way out with all of their knowledge and make way more through backdoor deals and what have you. I think pay them more. Because Lee Kuan Yew, former Singaporean Prime Minister, agreed with this as well. You want to be able to retain that talent rather than it fleeing David Cameron style, Christopher Pine style, Julie Bishop style. That's far more of a cringe than $600,000. Double the salaries, but no more consultancy, Price Waterhouse Coopery shenanigans. No more of that. 10 years, 15 years, maybe, who knows how long. But we need, and arm up some form of body in order to look into some of these backdoor deals where corporations can't just be like, oh yeah, ScoMo or someone like that. Yeah, well, how about a cushy $2 million a year board position where you do nothing but we just use you? None of that. I think it's a net benefit.
I can feel the libertarian bone.
But then you've got somebody like Albanese who's really not deserving of the money that we're paying him. That's number one. So perhaps on top of that, sure, pay them, but then have a term of only 1 year and then audit them.
Sure.
Audit them fully. Yeah. What have they done? How much have they achieved? And I tell you what, if they've not achieved a lot, give them money back.
I'd hate to sit on the board where Matt Keane's going because I'll tell you what, this straw is...
Be careful of a man wielding a red straw.
That straw, man, I got this.
Yeah.
But I think the revolving door, I think Dr. Marianne Damasi, she's a great journalist. She writes about health and a lot of things, but she also wrote about the revolving door. And when she interviewed me on that, I said a minimum term of 5 years post because technology moves so fast. I'm saying minimum because I think you were right, 10 to 15, that person's not worth it. And this straw, it'd be gone. Matt Keane, sorry, mate, you've lost your job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is that revolving door is, and I'm not making any accusations here because, I'm tapping into my criminology days. They're enablers of corruption.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm saying it's enabler. I'm not saying anyone is,
Yeah.
and I just want that to be very clear.
Yeah, of course.
But they're enablers for corruption. And this is the gateway to where corrupt deals are done. Okay? And that is it. Here you get access to an Australian intelligence service. You get commercial knowledge that no one else has. Because one of ASIO's primary functions, I know people talk about terror, one of its actual primary functions is to stop espionage against our commercial interests and preserve our national security from an economic standpoint. So when we look at the intelligence these guys get, because they get briefings, as you would know, they get briefed and they get this intel. This is where the intel passes across. And that ties into what you were saying. And it becomes an enabler. They then tap in. They sit on a board. They show up, once a month. They do one keynote speech and they're getting $1 to $2 million. They're getting that $1 to $2 million because we, the taxpayer, paid them to acquire a certain amount of knowledge that is now being pushed across to the private sector.
Bureaucrats.
As hard as it is to imagine giving Daniel Andrews more money, I would give him an extra $500,000 a year to know that he is not doing what he's currently doing with the Chinese, to go down that path of influence peddling, to have that certainty that there are laws to be certain that Daniel Andrews cannot do that.
And that's the key.
And that sounds awful to most people. Everyone in Victoria, how could you want to give Daniel Andrews more money? Well, look at the alternative we've got right now.
That's the key, laws, and we don't have them. We've got a regulation for almost anything. Here, you've got a law for a plastic straw, but we don't have laws to prevent this transfer or imparting of knowledge from one to the other, and it's being done in such a surreptitious nature that they're really digging to down to the bottom of the barrel to get this information across. Who pays at the end? Because once that private sector gets it, you're not getting this cheaper. You were getting it cheaper when the government was producing it. Privatising profits while you socialise the costs.
That's disgusting. Moving on, guys, from that, I'm open to very radical changes on that. Like, I think every time we register a debt with the budget, I think all the politicians should have a massive cut. I reckon, there's a lot of I'm crazy on like that. There's a big... I've got a very open mind to different solutions on that. But moving on, we had an interesting